It was a warm, serene afternoon. Jesus and his disciples sat on a grassy hill overlooking a small village nestled in the valley below. They had traveled a long distance, and now, as they rested, the golden light of the setting sun bathed the landscape, creating a peaceful stillness. The olive trees around them rustled softly in the breeze, and for a moment, it seemed as though all the world had quieted, waiting for something profound. Despite the peace of the evening within the hearts of the disciples, there was unrest. They had spent many months walking with Jesus, listening to his teachings, watching him heal the sick, feed the hungry, and perform miracles that defied their understanding. Yet, despite all they had witnessed, they could not shake the heavy weight of their own imperfections. Each of them carried burdens, doubts, and a sense of unworthiness. Peter, though bold and brave, could not forget the time he had denied knowing Jesus. Thomas, who was deeply thoughtful, felt plagued by doubt, uncertain if he truly had the faith to walk this path. Matthew, once a tax collector, was haunted by memories of the sins of his past. And the others too carried their own silent struggles, private failings and weaknesses they did not speak of, but which gnawed at their hearts. The air around them was thick with unspoken questions. Are we truly worthy to follow him? Will we ever be enough? How can we live up to his example when we are so deeply flawed? It was Thomas who finally voiced the thoughts that weighed heavily on them all. His voice, usually confident, trembled as he spoke. "Master," Thomas began, looking down at his hands, "I feel unworthy. I doubt. I stumble. I question things I should not. I fear that I am not strong enough in faith to be your disciple. How can I ever be worthy of your love when I am so full of imperfection?" The other disciples exchanged glances, their expressions serious. Each of them in their own way felt the same as Thomas. Peter, who had failed Jesus in his darkest hour, lowered his head, and even the ever-enthusiastic John sat in quiet contemplation. They had all felt the sting of failure and the constant fear that their weaknesses might render them unfit to be in the presence of such a perfect teacher. Jesus looked at his disciples, his eyes filled with compassion and love. He could see the heaviness in their hearts, the self-doubt that clouded their spirits. After a moment of silence, he spoke gently, but with a depth that resonated in their souls. "My dear friends," Jesus said, his voice calm and full of warmth, "let me tell you a story. There once was a carpenter named Eliab," Jesus began, his voice weaving through the stillness like a soothing balm. "Eliab lived in a small village not unlike the one below us. He had learned the trade of carpentry from his father, and his father before him. But Eliab was not the finest carpenter in the village. In fact, compared to the other carpenters, Eliab's work was always a little imperfect." Jesus paused for a moment, glancing at his disciples to ensure they were following the story. They were listening intently now, drawn in by his words. "When Eliab made a chair," Jesus continued, "it often wobbled. When he built a table, it wasn't always level. The doors he crafted didn't fit perfectly into their frames, and the shelves he made were sometimes a little crooked. While the other carpenters in the village built beautiful, flawless furniture that the villagers prized, Eliab's work always seemed to have something wrong with it." The disciples nodded, understanding. They too had felt like Eliab, comparing themselves to others and feeling as though they could never measure up. Because of these imperfections, Jesus said, the villagers often hired the other carpenters for the important jobs, building homes, crafting furniture for special occasions, or making beautiful things for the temple. Eliab was left with the smaller, less significant jobs, and even then the villagers would sometimes complain about his work, pointing out the flaws. Over time, Eliab began to believe that he wasn't good enough. He would look at the perfect work of the other carpenters and think to himself, "I will never be as skilled as they are. My work will never be perfect. I am not worthy of this craft." As Jesus spoke, the disciples could see themselves in Eliab's story. They had each, at some point, compared themselves to others who seemed more faithful, more devout, more capable, and had felt inadequate. They knew the weight of self-doubt and the feeling of being unworthy. But one day, Jesus continued, his voice growing softer, more introspective. Something unexpected happened. The wealthiest man in the village, Baruch, came to Eliab with a special request. Baruch was known for his fine taste and his high standards. He owned the grandest house in the village, and he was particular about every detail of his belongings. Eliab, Baruch said, I want you to build me a house. Not just any house, but the most beautiful house this village has ever seen. Eliab was stunned. Me? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Surely you want one of the other carpenters, the ones whose work is flawless. My work is full of mistakes. I cannot build the house you are asking for. But Baruch smiled kindly and said, I have seen your work, Eliab. I know it is not perfect, but I see the care and dedication you put into each piece you make. You may think your work is flawed, but I trust you. Build me this house with your hands and your heart, and I am certain it will be beautiful. Still unsure, but moved by Baruch's faith in him, Eliab agreed to take on the task. He spent months working on the house, carefully selecting the wood, shaping the stone, and putting his heart into every detail. Yet, despite all his effort, the imperfections remained. The walls were not perfectly straight, the windows were slightly crooked, and the roof had a small dip in one corner. Eliab could see all the flaws, and as he neared the end of the project, he felt a deep sense of shame. It's not good enough, he thought. Baruch will surely be disappointed. I have failed him. When the house was finally finished, Eliab stood outside, looking at the structure with heavy eyes. The imperfections seemed to scream at him. He dreaded the moment when Baruch would come to inspect it. He was certain that Baruch would see what he saw, the crooked windows, the uneven walls, the slight lean in the roof, and be disappointed. At this point, Jesus paused, letting his words sink in. The disciples were fully immersed in the story. They could feel Eliab's fear and his shame, just as they had often felt their own. They waited anxiously to hear what would happen next. When Baruch arrived to see the house, Jesus continued, Eliab stood by, bracing himself for the disappointment he was sure would come. But when Baruch looked at the house, something unexpected happened. A broad smile spread across his face and his eyes lit up with joy. It's perfect, Baruch exclaimed. Perfect? Eliab asked, his heart racing with confusion. But look at the walls, they are crooked. The windows are uneven and the roof has a dip. How can you say it is perfect? Baruch placed his hand on Eliab's shoulder and smiled warmly. Yes, he said, I see those things. But what I also see is the love and care you poured into every part of this house. Every imperfection tells a story, not of failure but of effort, persistence, and your heart. This house is not perfect because it is flawless. It is perfect because you built it with love, and in doing so you gave it life. Its beauty comes not from the absence of flaws, but from the presence of your dedication. The crooked walls and uneven windows, they are part of what makes this house unique, just as you are unique. This house, Eliab, is beautiful because it is yours. Jesus' voice softened as he finished the story, and for a long moment, the disciples sat in silence, reflecting on the words he had spoken. They could see themselves in Eliab's story, trying so hard to live up to impossible standards, constantly measuring themselves against others and finding themselves lacking. They had been so focused on their mistakes, their doubts, and their failings that they had forgotten the love, the effort, and the dedication they had put into following Jesus. Thomas, who had first voiced his concerns, was the most moved. His doubts had always troubled him, making him feel that he was not as faithful or as worthy as the others. But in Eliab's story he saw something new. He saw that his doubts, his questions, and his struggles were not signs of weakness. They were signs of a heart that was seeking, growing, and striving to understand. Master, Thomas said, his voice trembling with emotion, I have spent so much time worrying about my imperfections, about my doubts, my mistakes. I never realized that it was in those struggles that I was showing my heart, that I was learning and growing. Jesus turned to Thomas, his eyes full of compassion. Thomas, he said gently, Your worth is not in your perfection. It is in your heart. Your doubts, your questions, your struggles, they are part of your journey. I do not love you despite them. I love you because you are seeking, because you are growing. Like Eliab's house, your life may not be flawless, but it is filled with love, and that is what makes it beautiful. Peter, who had been silent for most of the story, now spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of his past mistakes. "Master," he said quietly, "I have failed you many times. I denied you when you needed me most. I have stumbled and fallen, and I carry the guilt of my failures every day. How can I be worthy of your trust when I am so deeply flawed?" Jesus placed his hand on Peter's shoulder and smiled warmly. "Peter," he said, "your failures do not define you. What matters is that you rise again after you fall. Your imperfections are part of your journey, and it is through them that you will become stronger. Like Eliab's house, your life is beautiful not because it is flawless, but because it is filled with love, resilience, and the willingness to keep trying." The disciples sat in silence, their hearts heavy with emotion. For so long, they had tried to live up to impossible standards, fearing that their flaws made them unworthy of Jesus' love. But now they saw the truth. Their imperfections were not a source of shame, they were a testament to their humanity, to their growth, and to their journey. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a gentle twilight over the hillside, the disciples felt an overwhelming sense of peace. They had carried the weight of their own expectations for so long, striving to be perfect, fearing that their mistakes and flaws made them less worthy of Jesus' love. But now they realized that it was not perfection that Jesus sought, it was their hearts, their effort, their willingness to love and to try even when they stumbled. Tears welled in the eyes of some of the disciples, not out of sorrow, but out of the overwhelming love and relief they felt. They had been loved all along, not for their perfection, but for their hearts, their struggles, and their growth. They had been loved because, like Eliab, they had put their heart into following Jesus, even when they faltered. Jesus looked at them with deep compassion, his voice soft but filled with love. "My dear friends," he said, "you are like Eliab's house, imperfect but beautiful. You are not meant to be flawless. You are meant to love, to grow, to learn, and to be loved even in your brokenness. My love is not something you must earn by being perfect. It is a gift I give freely, especially in your imperfection. You are enough just as you are." The disciples felt the weight lift from their hearts. The burden of striving for perfection had been replaced by the joy of knowing they were loved for who they were, flaws and all. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Jesus stood, gazing out over the village below. His voice was quiet but powerful as he spoke one last time. "Remember this, it is not in perfection that you will find peace. It is in accepting who you are with all your flaws, all your doubts, and all your struggles. My grace is not reserved for the perfect. It is for those who know they are broken, who know they are in need of love and grace. Like Eliab's house, your lives are filled with imperfections, but it is through those imperfections that your true beauty shines. You are loved not despite your flaws but through them." The disciples rose, their hearts filled with a deep and abiding peace. They had learned that their worth was not in being perfect, but in being loved by the one who saw them for who they truly were and embraced them fully. As they began their journey back down the hill, the disciples walked with a newfound sense of joy. They no longer carried the weight of their imperfections as burdens. Instead, they embraced them as part of their story, part of what made them human, and part of what made them worthy of love. In the quiet of that night, under the vast expanse of stars, the disciples knew that they had been forever changed. They had learned that their flaws were not something to be hidden or ashamed of. Instead, their imperfections were part of their journey, part of what made them who they were. They were not loved for being perfect. They were loved for being real, for trying, for growing, and for putting their hearts into everything they did. And in that truth, they found a peace that they had never known before, a peace that came not from striving to be perfect, but from knowing that they were enough, just as they were. This is end of the story. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.